What is up, guys? Welcome back to CageChat MMA. We're here with Darion for another Bellator preview. Of course, tonight is Bellator 253. We got a final spot for grabs. Darion Caldwell versus AJ Mckee. Darion, this one's guaranteed violence, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this was the kind of the big one going into this return, I guess, if you want to call it that, of the Featherweight Grand Prix during the COVID times. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one for a while. There's a bit of an animosity between the two, so I think both of them have a chip on their shoulder and something to prove in this division. One is obviously undefeated and trying to still climb and keep making his name and kind of take over Bellator. And the other is a former bantamweight champion who is trying to become a champion of two divisions. So I think this is going to be a huge one. There's a lot riding on this one.
Definitely. You mentioned there, obviously, both of them looking to make moves in the featherweight division. How impressed have you been with Darion Caldwell's move up to the featherweight division? Obviously, you mentioned there him being a bantamweight champion, of course.
Yeah, it's been interesting since the start to see how he translates into the division. Obviously, 10 pounds heavier, and off the back of two consecutive losses in which he first went over to Ryzen to fight Horiguchi for his bantamweight belt over there, and then Horiguchi came over and took his bantamweight belt at Bellator. So he lost twice, lost all the gold that was available, and he was kind of at a standstill where he had to figure out what he wanted to do next. And I think he made the right choice looking at it now in hindsight, instead of staying in that division and maybe fighting off some other contenders before getting another title shot. He went up to featherweight. He went straight into this featherweight tournament, and he's looked very impressive in this so far, and especially last time out when he beat the then undefeated Adam Boric, who was one of the higher rated fighters in this tournament, and he beat him quite decisively via stoppage.
Definitely. Obviously, maybe on record he wasn't the underdog, but obviously coming into this, being the lighter of the fighters that were in the Grand Prix, do you think he still has that underdog status going into this one tonight?
That's an interesting one, because I think because of his style being so dominant as a wrestler, I think people are looking at this as maybe the biggest test for Mckee. I think it's definitely the biggest test for AJ Mckee in terms of the quality of opponent, the caliber of opponent. So even though I do think that Mckee will be going into this one as the favorite, just purely because of his record, the momentum that he's going into this fight under, and just the hype that he has managed to build around his name at such a young age and so early into his career, even though he is 16-0, but it's still early into his career considering he's 25. I think he will be the slight favorite in the fans and on the bookies, but I wouldn't look over Caldwell in this one by any means. But I do think that a fighter like him being overlooked is just what he wants. I think that just adds that extra chip on the shoulder, like I said, and he is trying to prove something here in the higher division.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, that Adam Boric fight was right at the start of 2020. Obviously, this started at the back end of the last year. So what do you make? Obviously, everyone's in the same position here where they've had 9-10 months out of the cage now. But do you think there's going to be an element of, maybe, we didn't see it last week, but an element of octagon rust or cage rust?
I don't think so, and I think this longer layoff, I think, plays more into the hands of Mckee. As I watched an interview with him earlier during the week, during fight week, and he said that he had knee surgery at the start of the year, and when the fight was initially scheduled for June, he was at 70-80%, so he wasn't fully fit, but he was saying that he deemed himself ready to fight at the time, but obviously he wasn't fully ready, whereas now both fighters should be at 100%. And there is, again, I think, like we said last week, we can echo it this week, there's no excuses. You had so much time to prepare to study your opponent. So this is two fighters pretty much in the like peak athletic condition coming in and fighting. So it's what you want to see, two of the very best at 100% with no kind of pre-built excuses going into the cage.
Would you say then, in that case, with all due respect, that Darion Caldwell has almost come into this almost on the unfavourable side? Because had he, fought AJ Mckee in June, he would have fought a 60-70% AJ Mckee rather than 100% AJ Mckee that we think he's going to be facing tonight.
I mean, on paper, you could say that, and I also think that it's going to be interesting to see how Caldwell approaches Mckee's style, because even though I think that takedown will be there for him because of how aggressive Mckee is, Mckee is not scared to fight off his back. I remember Derek Campos took him down in that fight in Hawaii last year, or in December, I believe it was. And even though Campos took him down mid-round 2, he still ended up losing that card on the scorecards because of how active Mckee was off his back. So I think the fact that Mckee is somebody who's so aggressive and he will come charging at you from the first bell, and then if he gets taken down, he's not afraid. He has a very impressive jiu-jitsu game that still we haven't seen that much of. and he's very aggressive with just how he fights. He wants to cut you up with elbows and just fists from the bottom. So I think that's the most interesting aspect to me. If Caldwell does take him down, how does that fight play out? How does he get control of it? And how does he just adapt to an opponent that will want to take the fight to him? He won't be letting him take him against the cage and try to work away and chip away and get that takedown. This will be very much a lively fight from the start, I think.
Definitely. We've seen that, obviously, this past weekend in the UFC, of course, a lot of people questioning almost the control or the damage sort of mark when it comes to scoring. Obviously, Corey McKenna beat Kay Hansen 29-28 on the scorecards, which was a unanimous decision. Many people thought that Kay Hansen had done enough because she got the takedowns, because she had kept control of the fight. But Corey McKenna, people were saying that, she's done more damage. She's, put more control in terms of the striking rather than, showing off her ground game as Kay Hansen did on the night. Do you think we could potentially see something like that again tonight?
Yeah, I mean, that the thing with the judges scoring, especially now recently that we've seen, there has been, I think, quite a few decisions where you're like, two judges score a fight 30-27, and then another judge will score at 29-28 to the person that just was on the back of the 30-27s from the other two. And you're kind of like, how does this even happen? And I think going into these huge fights to end the year, there's still a little bit of a confusion because what counts more, submission attempts or submission defenses? What counts more if you're more active from the top or if you're more active from the bottom? I think those are still some unknowns. And that's why there was that kind of controversy around that McKenna-Hansen fight, which I actually personally thought that Hansen did edge 2-1 when it got 29-28, because I just thought that her control was very impressive, even though maybe she struggled to lock in any submissions. And she did take a little bit of damage off McKenna's back. I just thought that she did enough in terms of just octagon control and position control to get the victory. But obviously, judges can score it differently, and I think that's another kind of maybe a warning in a way to fighters that do like to take down and secure top control, that's not going to be enough. Because if you take somebody down and you have them on the ground for 5 minutes, but they land like 5 big elbows and cut you open from the bottom, they might get that round, even though you've been in the controlling position.
See, I think that's the beauty of this book, because I gave it the other way, just because, as you mentioned at the end of that first round, the strikes that Corey McKenna gave off, albeit she was in a vulnerable position in terms of being on her back with Hansen behind her, I thought the strikes that she gave her didn't get much of a response, so I just edged that round to her. Obviously, I gave Hansen the third round, and I gave Corey McKenna the second round, I believe, at least. And obviously, it's come out now that McKenna, rolled and fractured her ankle going into that third round, I believe, anyway. So you can see maybe that's where the troubles came into that round. But yeah, definitely, I think tonight, and we see it with referees as well, don't we? We see some referees go and let the ground game happen. Then you see others pull it up after 15 seconds, asking them to move, and then 5 seconds later go and stand up and reset in the position almost. It'd be interesting to see one where obviously MMA referees, probably go through the whole plethora of MMA, but it'd be interesting to see one where judges come from, and if their background's more boxing based, more wrestling based, or more jiu-jitsu based, maybe it's not the fact that we have 3 different judges. Maybe we have it's difficult. Maybe we have 3 judges from 3 different disciplines scoring it. Maybe out of 5, he's got 4 out of 5 out of his boxing discipline. He's got 4 out of 5 from his jiu-jitsu, and he's got 3 out of 5 maybe from wrestling. I don't know how it works. Judging, I don't believe the open scoring system is a way, and we are getting off track a little bit, but it's there to be discussed, isn't it?
There are a lot of inconsistencies, and even though there is some sort of a blueprint of how fights are being scored, you don't really know what counts most. Like, are some judges looking purely on significant strikes and takedown attempts and success rates? Are other judges looking at the damage, just like, the eye test? It's kind of difficult because you don't have all 3 judges sitting cage side judging off the exact same kind of scoring criteria. Everybody, like you said, can't score it differently. And maybe somebody is coming from a boxing background and it's like, oh, well, he got taken down 17 times, but he did outstrike him whenever they were standing. So he's going to win the round for me, So, yeah, I do think that, like you said, I don't know the open scoring. It's a question that needs to be asked, I think, going forward, because those decisions are happening sometimes at crucial moments where you're just like, oh, really? How is this being scored here? And I think more so than the judges need to be held accountable, I think they need to be provided more with guidance and instructions, and maybe even training in a way to just show you how you should correctly score an MMA fight and what counts more and what counts less during a fight.
Definitely. We had a quick look at the tape for the main event tonight. We aren't expecting the judges to get involved tonight, so it should be it should be fairly even one way or another. You got 15-3 there, 16-0 as you mentioned, undefeated there from Mckee. Both at the same height at 5'10", both coming in at 145. Of course. What are you making of this night? Close belt? I've got the reach wrong there. I didn't change it. That's my bad. Rushing the graphics.
So the reach is what, even?
I think the reach is. Let's bring it up now. My apologies. 74-inch reach there for Caldwell and 73.5 for Mckee. So very similar.
So it's virtually identical.
Yeah, virtually identical.
Yeah, I think that's how this fight is going to play out, especially like I mentioned earlier, stylistically. Whoever takes charge of this, I think both fighters are skilled enough all around to be comfortable in whatever position. Like if Caldwell ends up on his back, I think he's comfortable enough to either get back up or do something off his back, and the same goes vice versa. So what I want to see straight away, without really looking too much at the tail of the fight, because like you see, it's very equal. I think it's about who takes the momentum from round one, because obviously it's a good thing that it's a 5-rounder, because I think this might be one of those fights where the rounds are back and forth. Mckee might win the first, Caldwell might come back and win the second. And I think 3 might not be enough to settle this high caliber of a fight. But what I want to see is from the first bell, who comes out there and kind of throws down the gauntlet and tries to take charge of this fight, because I think that's going to be huge for confidence and for momentum too. Will Caldwell shoot if Mckee comes out first and Mckee maybe stuffs it, or if he lands his first takedown? Those are going to be some huge factors in this one, with 2 young fighters who might work off of confidence quite a lot in a fight like this.
Definitely. We'll get your prediction. Obviously, our predictions last week didn't quite go to plan, and we'll speak about that in a little while. But do you think we see someone lose their own? Do you think AJ Mckee progresses on into that Grand Prix final?
I was trying to base my prediction of both of their last fights, and I was really impressed with AJ Mckee in that Derek Campos fight, in a way that I think he was starting to lose his head a little bit in that second round and going into the third, because he's somebody who's a showman and he wants to go out there and get a finish. In the first round of this Grand Prix, he was fighting Georgi Karakhanyan, and he said that he wants the Bellator fastest KO, and he went out there and he KO'd him in like 10 seconds. And it's like this dude he's a showman. So I think this is a huge test of character for him, because you're going into a fight against somebody who is no joke now. And do you prioritize trying to put him away early, or do you maybe kind of settle a little bit, fight out a game plan, maybe see if you can mix it up, and then see if a finish presents itself? So that's one of my biggest question marks for him, is does he lose his head in this one again? Because out of frustration, that can backfire on you against an opponent who's as dangerous, as decorated as Caldwell. But with that being said, I do think that there's just so much momentum, so much hype. I think he is a star in the making. He's only 25. He's 16-0. I don't know if he's going to fight out his career in Bellator, but I think if he wins this belt and then maybe moves up and challenges for another, he might be on the move before he's 30. So I think he's one of Bellator's future superstars that they have made from scratch. All of his fights are under the Bellator banner. And I do think that he will get his hand raised in this one. But I don't think it's going to be as dominant as he has been in all of the previous fights. I think he will get tested tonight by a very credible opponent.
Definitely. Obviously, you mentioned last week the influence that his dad has on him. I wonder if we're going to see any sort of a Trevor Whitman-like talks in between rounds. If it gets into that 3rd or 4th round, then maybe he's a little bit, maybe if he sees 2-3 rounds ahead going into the 4th or 5th, and maybe he's getting a bit too cocky. I wonder if his dad can pull him in and go, calm down, we're not here for this, we're here to get into that final and to get you that strap. Because obviously, with who's left in the Grand Prix, if he gets to 18-0 and wins that title, he's then got the win obviously against Caldwell, and then potentially, Emmanuel Sanchez or Pitbull. He's going to have at least 2 champions on his resume by the time he wins this tournament.
Exactly, and I was watching that interview with him beforehand. He made a very good point that if he goes on to win this Grand Prix, he will have fought 18 people in the featherweight division in Bellator, because he's been here from scratch, obviously. So all of his opponents on that 16-0 record are featherweights that fought under the Bellator banner. So he was like, if I win this belt, what's there to do for me in this division? So I think he makes a fair point that if he wins this one, he might go straight up for that 155 belt.
Challenge Pitbull again.
And go at Pitbull again, especially if maybe Pitbull slips up to Sanchez and you get the fight like, oh, well, Mckee and Pitbull was the perfect ending. Oh, well, we can still get it at 55 and see what happens here. So I do think that was a very good point that he made himself. If he can be composed enough and mature enough now that he's had so much fights to go through this one, get to the final, and then get his 145 belt, I think that might be over for him in this division, certainly for the short-term future as he goes after another belt, and then we'll see what might be next.
Definitely, it'd be interesting, isn't it? Like, let's play hypotheticals here. If AJ Mckee gets a win tonight, Pitbull beats Sanchez, we get that in the final. AJ Mckee then beats Pitbull for the featherweight title. They move up. Maybe it doesn't go to plan, and then Pitbull goes, right, you try to come for the lightweight. You didn't take my title. I'm going to come back and take your featherweight belt, which was originally mine. So you got a trilogy there in the making with pretty much not much work to be done.
Exactly. It's money for Bellator. I think if Mckee winning tonight, I think, is the perfect scenario for them. Obviously, Scott Coker will never take sides, but I think he knows, and the way that they have groomed and kind of helped develop Mckee from the very start of his career, that was, I think, about 5 years ago. It just kind of shows that he is now starting to repay them, and if he gets the win tonight, I think he's kind of sets himself up as the Bellator star now. That like, he will be, when you think of Bellator, you will think of him in that featherweight division going into that Grand Prix final. And like you said, I mean, I think every fans and non-fans and media's perfect scenario for this is that Pitbull fight, because it just sets up so many opportunities, whoever wins the final of this Grand Prix.
100%. It's when they announce a lightweight Grand Prix next year, and he's got to go through the whole Grand Prix process again just to get to Pitbull.
Well, Pitbull's going to have to go through it again then, though. That's
very true.
The whole thing.
Yeah, very true. But we move on to the co-main event before we have a little wrap-up of last week's. But Benson Henderson in the welterweight division this time up against Jason Jackson. What extent for this one? Obviously, Benson Henderson, former UFC champion, of course, but he's on the downward spiral of his career. It's almost time for him to hang up the gloves. Is it getting to that point now?
Yeah, I was very surprised to see him on the co-main on this card. Obviously, the card compared to last week isn't very packed with talent. It has to be said. So I think this might be a bit of a shoehorn in for Henderson to kind of make up the numbers here, put another big name to co-main, a legendary name more than a big name in the present times to co-main a very, very good fight in the featherweight division. And yeah, it's an interesting move up to welterweight. Obviously, 3 losses in a row at 55. Last one coming to Michael Chandler, who's obviously left now. And I think we did a preview, me and you, for that Chandler and Henderson fight back in the day. And we were talking about how, well, if he loses to Chandler, maybe it's going to be time to either call it a day or maybe leave and look for another avenue in the sport. I have seen that he has been very into his coaching. Like, he's in the corner of a lot of fighters at UFC events. And I just wonder if maybe it's getting to a point now where it's a conflict of interest in a way, because what does he really have to prove left in mixed martial arts as a fighter? Like, he was a champion. He's won a lot of big fights. He's been in big fights all his career. And now a move to welterweight at this point. I mean, if he gets a win tonight, who knows what happens next? I mean, there's no rankings like we always talk about during these Bellator previews, so anything can really happen, especially for a big legendary name that kind of will still bring in eyes. But it just feels at this point like maybe it's just extending delaying the obvious that's inevitable.
Obviously, Father Time catched up with everyone. We're looking at the period of fighters from probably 2010 to maybe 2016 that were in their peak, and probably before that, your Donald Cerrone's, your Anthony Pettis's, your Robbie Lawler's, they're all getting to that age now where they are looking, where mentally they're not done, but maybe physically they are done. That we know the monsters of Benson Henderson, Robbie Lawler, Nate Diaz, even you can put into that point of view. Jorge Masvidal's coming to that point, albeit he's had a very good 12 to 18 months previously.
Anderson Silva.
Yeah, Anderson Silva too, of course, a free agent. Could we be seeing him in Bellator? We'll talk about that too. But it's I wonder, obviously Conor McGregor came in about 2013-14, but I wonder how many of these fighters that we're seeing retire these past 3 years missed out on that little bit of influx and that influence. Because obviously it'd be interesting to see if there's a financial gain that they're fighting still, because obviously their careers are Hall of Fame worthy. And as you mentioned, the coaching for Benson Henderson, that's a pathway that he will probably thrive in, and the knowledge that he's picked up for his career. But I wonder if they missed out on that financial gain that they're probably fighters now, at least, albeit with the pay debate that's going on. I wonder if they missed out on that little overlap that McGregor brought in, and the increase in revenue that the UFC can pay fighters with, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in Benson Henderson's aspect, because I think you would imagine that a fighter that has been around for so long and has been fighting the names that he has been fighting his whole career, It's not like he has been ever really fighting any gimmies, and he is not a gimme himself either, because he's still fighting big names like Michael Chandler last time. He's going over to the UFC and he wants to be in the top 5 straight away. So you can see that it's still a very high level, top of the rank fight. So I can't imagine that he is not making like enough money, that financially it might be a worry, and especially with the fact that he's already set up with a gym, and like you think that if he retires, he's gone straight into full-time coaching and to be a mentor for all these up-and-coming fighters. But I do think that you make a good point, though, because when we talk about these fighters that maybe, like you said, mentally they aren't done yet, they feel like they have a lot to give left, but obviously Father Time for 99% of the time is undefeated. There's only a few freaks of the nature that can avoid him and kind of put him away back on the shelf. And I think, like when we talk about these retirements, and like you said, and I'd add BJ Penn to the equation too, I think it's more fighters that maybe don't really have a clear pathway of what they're going to do after fighting. Like fighting, they're those old school guys that fighting has been their whole life. And I think maybe financial reasons might come into it too. Like you made a good point too. Like the MMA, being an MMA fighter just wasn't as marketable as it is now. Like you couldn't make the money that some fighters can come in right away and start making in the post-McGregor era, if you want to call it that. So it is an interesting one, because especially with this move up in weight, which when by law, I think, or by rule, I think when you see a fighter start maybe deteriorate a little bit, they don't really tend to go up to a division where people tend to hit heavier. So this is a very interesting move for me, and I'm curious to see what Henderson does look like, because he's fighting a guy who I think will be hungry on the back of a 2-fight win streak in this welterweight division. Getting a name like Benson Henderson in a main event, like that's a golden ticket for some people.
Definitely. Obviously, if Jason Jackson gets a big win tonight, but obviously we mentioned there, if Benson Henderson does win, he is a big name. Could we see him up against someone like an MVP? Obviously, Douglas Lima is probably, you could say, with all due respect to the welterweight division, is lacking maybe a number one contender, albeit there isn't rankings. There's someone hard. It's not easy to pin a name and go, right, you're fighting for the title next. Albeit MVP is probably 2 fights away, maybe, because he wants that rematch so badly.
I mean, if Henderson comes out here and looks very good, and let's say he gets a stoppage, but even if he gets a unanimous decision because he just dominated a guy that does look like he can fight. He has a 2-fight win streak. I think he hasn't lost a lot in his last 5. His record is 12-4, I believe. So I think it is somebody that you don't just give out a co-main slot. You give it to somebody who you think, oh, maybe there is something to make of this guy. And especially if he gets through even just the mental task of standing across the cage from Benson Henderson. I think if Henderson comes in here and does get the victory, that is a very good fight to make, Henderson against MVP in this division, because like you said, if Henderson, the skills, you obviously don't lose them, but if he translates well into this weight division with power and with his chin, that's a very good fight for MVP to get, and for people to maybe like quieten down a little bit that, oh, well, he's finally fighting a very high-profile fight against a very big name. It's a fight that I think would gather the attention of not only the hardcore European and UK fans, but also the US fans will look over and like, oh, like this might be a one that's worth watching. And again, if Henderson wins this one and beats somebody like MVP with the tear that he's been on, you're like, oh, well, maybe he has one more title run in him, because obviously he's not the oldest yet.
No, and definitely, I'm looking at his resume there, and I think Glover Teixeira, 41 years of age, looking for a title shot against Jan Blachowicz, obviously himself as an elder statesman of MMA. But going through his record here, you look at let's see, we've got obviously, hold on, give me 1 second. There we are. We've got Michael Chan, obviously mentioned, going to the UFC. He's 36 now, so he's someone on that elder side as well. Jorge Masvidal, Donald Cerrone, RDA, who looks like he could be turned into a lightweight title picture maybe with his winner over Paul Felder. Look at Anthony Pettis is in that same sort of ballpark now. We're looking at maybe he's too much done. He's fluttered around the division as well, gone up to welterweight, tested whether he can be there. Obviously, he thought Nate Diaz, Frankie Edgar again, moving down to bantamweight again, and Clay Guida, Jim Miller, all these names that's on that record, and a fantastic record that he's got, are all names now that you're looking at, they are on that retirement side now. They're not fighters. Even Donald Cerrone this week has come out and said, right, I'm making one last push at 155 and then I'm calling it a day. I've got 2 years left in me. Yeah,
I mean, looking at that resume by itself, I mean, it's death row. It's like that's war after war. That has to have a toll, not only mentally, because you just have to prepare for all those high-profile fights against fighters that can't finish you, but it's also the damage that you take. So I think when these fighters get to the later side of their careers, the chin, it can't hold up for so long. Like your brain can take just so much damage before, if you get jabbed, it's going to be like, oh, you know what? We're not taking hits today. We're dropping. The lights are going off after this. There's just so much damage you can take, and yeah, it's there are a few exceptions, like the Glover Teixeiras, like the Jan Blachowicz, although it's at a heavier weight class, which I guess is in theory even more dangerous because they hit even harder. That do have that resurgence and the late push. And I think seeing Henderson bounce back from 3 losses in a row and make a charge at the welterweight title would be surprising. But I think we've all seen stranger things happening in this sport. And obviously, by credentials alone on paper, he could do it.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that maybe, obviously this is a debate for another day, but I wonder because those that are in the light heavyweight, obviously they're hitting harder, so they're probably taking less damage overall in their careers. I wonder if that's something that takes into that. Obviously, Benson Henderson being at lightweight, you can take 50, 60 strikes in a fight. If we look at Ferguson Gaethje, you probably don't see that sort of one way sort of barrage of damage in terms of the heavyweight and light heavyweight division. Obviously, 2 or 3 of those you can see, but by that time the lights are probably out. So I wonder, obviously there's still a lot of damage to take on the brain, but I wonder if there is a factor of because they're in the cage a shorter amount of time, even if they have been on the bad side of the loss, that they continue a little bit longer. And obviously heavyweights and light heavyweights do peak at a later age.
I mean, the perfect example of what you just said is Andrei Arlovski in the UFC, because it felt like he was finished. He was getting knocked out by everyone. Like, you could blow too hard on him and he would fall over. And now the guy can't stop winning again. It's like his chin looks better, his movement, he looks lighter on his feet the older he gets. He doesn't take as much damage now, even though he's in longer fights, because he's getting more decisions now than he used to back in his prime when he was getting all those KOs. But he was also getting KO'd all the time. And I guess, yeah, maybe on the chin aspect of it now, where the way he's fighting in this kind of new adopted style where he's taking his time more and not taking as much punishment, well, I don't know if he's going to be getting anywhere near the top 5 in that division, but he's putting together quite a nice run when everybody thought that, maybe Arlovski, maybe it's time for him to start sitting out more and maybe prepare for retirement.
Definitely. Obviously, we move on to looking at last week's events. Of course, Bellator 252 took place. Pitbull did make his mark into the semi-final. We thought there was some magic in the air of that night, but unfortunately, the magic went to Pitbull. Well, I say unfortunately, it wasn't unfortunately. He put on a splendid display, didn't he? For what, 2 minutes?
Yeah, I had to put away that champion hoodie. That wasn't coming back on with me today because that was a bad one. Yeah, I mean, it was just everything going into that fight, the build-up, the kind of nostalgia, the reminiscing of the McGregor thing and all that. I think it was just like these things happen sometimes when everything comes full circle. But it just looked on the night like they weren't in the same league, didn't it? Like from the start, it didn't look. I didn't like how Carvalho was taking Pitbull's shots. It just looked like he cannot take them. His chin just can't withstand them, and he fell over in those 2 minutes. He got dropped a couple of times before he was finished. And when he did get finished, it looked like he was shook up quite a bit. Like he didn't really know where he was for a minute. So I do think that going into most fights, Pitbull's power is overrated, and especially in maybe like a fight that he did against Archuleta, where it was a very lackluster 5-rounder. You thought, maybe he's starting to teeter off a bit, and younger fighters especially, can take advantage. But Pedro did what he said he would do in coming out and trying to be the aggressor. Well, he was penned back very quickly. Like, when you are so confident and you go out and fight against the champion and he hits you once and you taste that power, and you're like, this power is no joke. That can turn everything upside down in your head. And I think it did in Pedro's hand. Like, his world got flipped upside down in a moment. And Pitbull, like the veteran and the champion that he is, pounced and finished it off expertly without taking any damage whatsoever.
Definitely. Obviously, we imagine that Pedro Carvalho used that and bounced back pretty quickly. Obviously, he's still very young in the game. Yeah. And obviously, we see it, don't we? I think Darren Till Woodley, we thought Darren Till might come in and be the new guard. Obviously, he was on a terrific run going into that Woodley fight. But Woodley, the champion in his prime and in his peak, said no to that. It seemed like Pitbull, is still very much in his prime.
Yeah, and I think the fires, like you say, with Darren Till, I think is a good example. And Pedro, with how he was during all the build-up to this fight, was similar. They start selling you on just how calm they are, how prepared they sound for this moment. He seemed very confident, but at the same time, it felt like his head was screwed on properly, that he knew what it would take to beat somebody like Pitbull. But then that's why champions, and especially long-term champions like Pitbull is in two divisions, are so special, because those talents that people start buying into come up and they just knock them down. Like it's literally the cliche, line them up and I'll knock them down. And that's what Pitbull has been doing for so long. And he proved it once again. And I think he deserves to be in that conversation that he brought up himself in his post-fight stuff, that he's not only the best featherweight in Bellator, but he believes that he's the number one in the world.
Definitely. Obviously, there was a lot of conversation on that. Do you think, obviously, we saw Chandler go to the UFC. Do you think we could ever see Pitbull in the UFC? Obviously, Dana White, there was that clip going around where he was asked about Pitbull, and he was like, who is Pitbull? I don't know who he is. Now, whether that's Dana playing games, because he can't exactly come out and go, yeah, I love that guy, I want to sign him up, because obviously that Bellator then go, right, you have to pay us X, Y, Z for him. And equally, you can't go, yeah, I don't like him, because then that ruins future endeavors. But the fact that we've seen the likes of Ben Askren, obviously Michael Chandler, and I do think there's been a quite night and day treatment of Ben Askren and Chandler from Dana. The fact that Chandler was immediately given a support shot almost on a title shot had Gaethje or Khabib not been able to perform, whereas Ben Askren had to go through Robbie Lawler, Damian Maia, and Jorge Masvidal. That's death row, and obviously Dana White personally didn't really get on with Ben Askren, where he seems to be very fond of Chandler. Do you think where do you put Pitbull in that scenario?
Well, I mean, just to quickly touch on what you said about Askren, I do agree that the kind of difference in treatment was there. But when you do look at it, Askren came in, he talked a lot, he was undefeated, and he went into Robbie Lawler straight away. Obviously, he won that quite controversially. But it's like, well, if you're talking the talk, you have to get thrown in there, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Like, you come in here undefeated, you're saying that you're the best in the world, but you can't fight a guy that's 15th or 14th. You have to go in. And I think with Chandler, even though his and Dana's relationship seemed different, it's the same thing. He came in and he was like, well, you think you're so good over in Bellator, you're talking a lot that you could come in here and become the champion. Well, then if not, somebody can't fight here, let's see it. So I do kind of like that in a way. Obviously with Chandler, I have a bit of issues with him not wanting to accept many fights. He's kind of being nitpicky, even though he hasn't proven himself on the UFC stage. Like we've seen, it is difficult with Ben Askren's example. It is difficult to prove yourself in this stage. And yeah, it's when you put Pitbull into this equation, I think he's one of those fighters that when it's all said and done and he never fights in the UFC, you're going to be like, oh, well, what if this absolute monster that dominated this other company in two divisions came over here and challenged for either the 45 or 50? I think 45 would be better for him in the UFC. It's one of those, because it just seemed like, even though a lot of people, especially more casual fans, like to discredit Bellator and the Khan conversation and all that stuff, he does seem like the real deal, doesn't he? Like he's a global star, and he is a great performer, and his skills are undeniable. Like there are, maybe as a whole, the talent level in Bellator and the UFC doesn't come that close, but at the very top of the top, there are a lot of fighters that could do a lot of damage in the UFC, I do believe. And I am looking forward to seeing what Chandler can do when he does eventually get that fight in the top 5, because I guess that's where we're headed. And yeah, with Pitbull, I think it's one of those, I can't see a scenario where he does end up in the UFC, but I would love to see it though, personally.
Definitely. I think it's fair to say at least that all the Bellator champions, at least, obviously they're the 1%, 2% that are right at the top of that pyramid. But I think all of them get in the top 10 of the UFC divisions quite easily. And you're looking at Pitbull as one that could go very far, especially in the featherweight. I do agree, if you put him in lightweight, he might get a bit overshadowed there and a bit overlooked with the likes of Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, and all that. But when you're looking at Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie, Yair Rodriguez, Alex Volkanovski, of course, the champion, and Max Holloway, I think there are some more favourable and enjoyable matchups there for Pitbull.
Yeah, he is an undersized lightweight. So, like, even against Pedro, people were looking at the reach and the height, and you're like, oh, well, maybe Carvalho can use that to his advantage. But obviously, with how smart he is at evading, getting stuck in too close, and kind of he never really leaves his chin open. I think he is the perfect size for a featherweight, even though still some fighters do come in there bigger than him. But yeah, I do agree that some of the lightweights in the UFC are welterweights that are cutting down to 55. So I don't think he would. I mean, that's not to say that he wouldn't fare well in there, but I do think that the perfect playing ground for him in the UFC would be 45 against the fighters that you did mention. And I do think that he would fit into that top 5 even right off the bat, because a double champion from Bellator coming in here, I think that's the least that he deserves, to be shown that kind of respect.
Oh yeah, 100%. So I think that a matchup between him and Zabit would be very pleasurable to watch, I'd imagine. But again, as you mentioned, he slots right into that top 5. Maybe someone else who slots in that top 5 is Emmanuel Sanchez. He defeated Daniel Thaicel last week, and all respect to Daniel Thaicel. That second round, the amount of pain he endured and damage he took, and that's where maybe you can question that. Maybe he's taken more impact with that second round and continuing for that whole fight than maybe a heavyweight or light heavyweight would have done, because they would have probably got knocked down in that second round maybe.
Yeah, that fight was crazy, and I think I was trying to draw some parallels in that one. Sanchez reminds me a lot of Tony Ferguson in kind of, maybe not credentials and fighting style. Well, fighting style, I guess, how he just loves to brawl. He just seems like a person that he will go in there. He will take damage like he did. He was quite cut up after the fight, but he dishes it out like crazy. Like I feel like he's one of those people that loves pain, like a Ferguson, like a Justin Gaethje. Like he's just a warrior. I think that might be maybe an equivalent in Bellator of Tony Ferguson. And I was very impressed with his performance, because even though he wasn't able to put Thaicel away, he looked very composed. He looked very sharp on his feet, and I think that's going to be huge in his future, obviously, matchup with Pitbull in the other side of the bracket. Yeah, I was impressed. It was a rematch too, so there was a lot on the line there when it comes to the pride and everything like that. And he did what he was kind of setting out to do. And he was another one of those fighters that was coming into this 145 tournament with a chip on his shoulder and trying to prove himself that he does belong at the top. And obviously, he is in the top 4 now. Yeah, so he does belong.
100%. And I don't think we can talk about featherweights without mentioning one name, Aaron Pico. Last week, that other hand right wasn't, absolutely explosive, and I'm sure he's absolutely gutted that he's not in this Grand Prix, in this sort of equation these last 2 weeks. He must be gutted watching these 6 fighters go at it.
Yeah, it's crazy because he was probably about one fight away, maybe one win, and he would be right in there because just off his name and hype alone. But man, what a performance! I mean, ever since his record kind of narrowed down a little bit because he took those two losses, he's bounced back like it's nobody's business, and he is knocking out everybody that Bellator lines up for him. And I tweeted out right after that fight, like, that guy is super talented. Right on the ground, standing up, he has power, he has control. He is very impressive. He seems like a total package to me that is still developing, obviously, because he's very young. His record is now what, 6-3 or 7-3?
7-3 now.
Yeah, 7-3. So I think a couple more fights to build that record back up to where you can sell a big fight. And he's going to be right back up there fighting those monsters that he was fighting on like his 3rd and 4th fight in Bellator. But man, what an impressive performance! And that guy carries power in those gloves. Definitely.
I'm just looking here at his resume at the moment. That was his longest fight in his professional career, which is absolutely mental. None of them have gone the distance. He's either knocked out or done the knocking out himself, you could say. Do you think, we're looking at someone who's a superstar, but do you think that he might need to learn, obviously he's still very young, but a bit of composure? Maybe he does need someone like a Trevor Whitman, because he does feel very Gaethje-esque at the moment, where he's willing to leave it all on the line, perhaps.
I think he's definitely improved a lot already, and I think he's even acknowledged that himself in interviews, that where he said he needed those losses, maybe not in as brutal fashion as they both were, but in a way to just keep grounded and to realize that fighting is not all about securing the knockout, even though that's what all of his fights have been so far, all 10 of them. I do agree with you, though, that I think that's the development process for him now. And that's why I don't mind him being in those fights where maybe he is supposed to win. People are looking at it like, oh, well, that's a gimme. But let's see how he manages those, because sometimes even against the fighter that has a bad record and you're expected to go in there and KO him, sometimes that opportunity doesn't present yourself. Like, those fighters usually have not much to lose. They come in here and you are their golden ticket. So I think the fight management aspect of him now, that proved it here in this fight, because I'm sure he wanted another first round KO, but he kind of took it more easier. He took the foot off the pedal a little bit, managed the fight out, and landed when the opening was there. He landed a bomb, and that was all she wrote. But I do think that over the next 2 or 3 fights, as his record obviously he will try to build it up more, like I said a few minutes ago. It's going to be interesting to see how he manages those fights, because it's all about now for him not getting in those wars and just kind of showing off his skill set more than taking a lot of damage and winning scrappy fights. I think you want to see some more dominant performance from him as the quality of opponent continues to improve.
Definitely, and it is, he's only 24 years of age, and it is a crazy sport and a crazy world where we're openly watching them improve and how their trainers developing over time. And obviously, you don't really get that in many sort of scenarios in work. You don't just get someone coming around every like 2 or 3 months going, right, you've done this phenomenal, but you're terrible at this. And then telling to go back on to the drawing board in such a large amount of people. Can you imagine? And obviously, I don't know Pico's following, but he's probably getting thousands of people. And I hate this when you go down someone's profile and you always get that one person responding going, if you work on this better, you'll be a champion. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, no, I get exactly what you mean, and I think especially like you said with how much just insight in MMA, I think, yeah, like you said, in more than any other sport, just how much we do see and how much we hear and how the dialogue between fighters and media and fighters and fans is so open. I think it's more difficult than maybe like in football. If you have a direct comparison, you can bring somebody in from the academy and shield them away from the media for years before they speak to the media the first time, and you don't really know of their existence outside of the pitch that you see them on TV for 90 minutes. Whereas here, as soon as you come in, you win your first fight, maybe you're 19, 20, 21, you have your first media obligations, then right afterwards, your following starts building, and yeah, it's huge. So I do think that for him, and he is only 24, it was important to take those 2 losses. Maybe it's better earlier than later and get those learning curves in and take a step back a little bit and now start gradually coming back up. And now that I think of it, that we're talking here, AJ Mckee might win the Grand Prix, and by the time he wins that Grand Prix, I think Aaron Pico might be on the collision course, the 2 biggest names in that division, 2 youngest prospects. Because if Mckee does clear out this division in this Featherweight Grand Prix, and especially if he defeats the champion, most of the fighters that are at the top of the division when it comes to a title shot will be coming off losses. So then you might have a surge in Aaron Pico with maybe a 9-3, 8-3, or a 10-3 record by then. And you're like, oh, this is money right here again. 2 very young and up-and-coming fighters at the top of their game. And I think that's an avenue Bellator might want to take.
Definitely. I'm just looking at, a couple that in that opening round probably haven't had a fight yet, I'd imagine. So you're probably looking at Aaron Pico. You're probably looking at the likes of, your Daniel Strauss, your Derek Campos, Adam Boric, perhaps, obviously, Henry Corrales. You're looking at those names. Maybe if they haven't had a fight yet, you maybe Aaron Pico going, you could fancy it here.
A couple of rematches might be coming up soon.
Maybe Saul Rogers. Maybe some of those that didn't quite get it through that opening round, and then obviously, if these fights probably January, February, you're expecting now. If he wants a quick turnaround, those that maybe lost in the quarter and semi-finals, you're probably then looking for them to have bouts. Which at that point, he could be looking at the end of 2021. Maybe, as you mentioned, they're fighting someone like AJ Mckee for the featherweight title.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I will give Bellator the utmost credit for is how they do scout these fighters and bring them in straight from amateur, because whether you like Bellator or not, they are, I think, at the moment, the second kind of leading MMA promotion in terms of popularity and just the highest profile fighters and everything. I think if you just look at it together, they are just below UFC objectively. And I do like how they scout those guys coming out of amateur and they bring them in. And when you look at the likes of Mckee, his first fight is in Bellator, and right now he is 16-0. There, like, they do give them that platform to get built up, and I do like that. When you scout hundreds of fighters per year, I think you're bound to start making some superstars, and I think they are on the course here now across multiple divisions to seeing those come to fruition after years of investing time in development. And I think Mckee and Pico are the perfect example here.
Definitely. Obviously, it's not a direct comparison because they don't come in at 0-0 many of the times. But you're looking at the Contender Series and how much funding and promo the UFC put into that to then be building stars. Obviously, you go into Contender Series, if you get a superb knockout, you're guaranteed a UFC contract. And then the UFC have that clip there of you knocking someone out to promo for the rest of your career and to help build you up. We've seen it with Sean O'Malley, Alex Perez, who's fighting for the flyweight title this weekend. Is another one from the Contender Series, which is now seems to be the maybe the number one route into the UFC now.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the Contender Series, and I think that's perfect. Yeah, like, it's a similar kind of thing, but then again, very different because, yeah, like you said, nobody's really coming in there at 0-0. Bellator are trying to kind of groom, like I said earlier, with Mckee, their fighters from the ground up. Whereas UFC are doing another great thing, which is give more attention to the regional stages and to maybe some smaller promotions that will never really get those viral moments. Whereas now somebody who's fighting maybe just locally in California or Nevada or Arizona, wherever you might want to name, he can come into the Contender Series, secure a knockout, and maybe even if he doesn't get a contract, which even though, like you said, if you do get a knockout victory, you're more than likely getting the contract. But now people know your name, and somebody that might happen to watch the Contender Series will see you pop up elsewhere and go watch that fight. So yeah, it's definitely huge, even for the guys that sometimes lose, but they're close fights and they're tough. Like, you can't knock them out. That still helps them hugely in pursuing a career in MMA. And I do love to see that. You do love to see it.
Definitely, and of course, the biggest name, albeit he didn't lose, although it must feel like a loss, is Brendan Loughnane. He won the fight. Obviously, he didn't get a contract, and immediately the next day, it was the biggest thing being spoken about in MMA. And obviously, he's gone on to PFL, albeit 2020 hasn't planned out the way he probably had planned it out at the start of the year. But if you get a controversial decision, maybe Dana White doesn't fancy you on the night, the MMA community can then go, right, we want him in here, XYZ promotion, book him a fight there, and he's immediately a star in that promotion.
I mean, yeah, for Brendan, right off the bat, after the everything that kind of blew up after that fight where he didn't get a contract, even though by consensus, everybody and even all those journalists that covered the UFC on the daily were thinking that he has been robbed of it. And he was fielding offers left and right, as we do know, when he had time to sit down and pick the perfect one that he liked. Even though, yeah, ultimately he was unsuccessful in securing the UFC deal unfairly, but yeah, it kind of set him up.
And my phone has just died, which is probably a good place to almost wrap it up there. But we've got this graphic here. Obviously, the 4 semi-finals left. 1, pick your final, and 2, pick who wins.
Oh man, yeah, I'm just going with the simple one because I really want to see it. I want to see Pitbull against AJ Mckee in the final. I want to see the guy that has been at the top for so long against the guy that is just continuously knocking off fighter after fighter and getting stoppages and getting submissions. It's going to be the most entertaining fighter in the division against a guy who everybody has been trying to beat for so long. I mean, that's my prediction. I'm saying it like it's going to happen. That's what I would like to happen. I think in an ideal scenario, for the business standpoint, AJ Mckee gets the victory and becomes the new featherweight champion. And like you said, I'm all in on that trilogy hype now that he goes lightweight, maybe loses, and they fight again. Make a fight for both belts at 150 in that trilogy fight. Why not? But yeah, I think I've been high on AJ Mckee since I've seen him fight the first time, and I've been following his progress in this Grand Prix, and he just looks like he's maturing and getting better with every fight. And I'm really looking forward to this main event tonight. And I think he is my pick to kind of solidify superstar status by taking it all in this Grand Prix.
Definitely. Obviously, we are unaware of when Pitbull and Sanchez's semi-final will be. I'd imagine probably into the new year now, because obviously we've got the path now for Bellator in December at least. So it might be January 2021, and we're probably looking at the final, maybe in March perhaps. I don't know how long they want to keep these two out, but yeah, I'd be up for that. AJ Mckee, Pitbull final. I do think Pitbull might just beat Emmanuel Sanchez, but again, I think there's almost a passing of the guard maybe from Pitbull down to AJ Mckee, who's going to be the new king of that division.
Yeah, I totally agree, and yeah, I think time frame wise, I would imagine that maybe January or February is when they want to get in on that. It's just I guess depends on damage. Pitbull took pretty much no damage, so I think this fight will dictate whether this final will happen quickly or the next semifinal, and then how quickly the final can happen. But yeah, I think most people looking at it on paper, especially from outside of the Bellator kind of inside, you would want to see two of the biggest names and two of the most marketable names fight, because like I said, I think we were talking off camera before that I think there are a few events where Bellator can go into a fight week and say that they have a better main event than the UFC. It doesn't happen that often because how many events the UFC puts on. But I do think that this kind of a fight could go head to head with any main event that the UFC can put on whenever it does happen.
100%. And obviously, wrap up there, but we'll be back on December the 10th. Obviously, Alima Lema Fallon is defending her flyweight title, so we'll be back for that. But we're going to wrap it up there, guys. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Make sure to hit like and follow on the Facebook channel as well. We're on the road to 2K now. And obviously follow Arian on Twitter, of course. We've now got the new fleets out at the moment. So expect to be seeing stories from everyone in the MMA community and ourselves. Maybe a couple of United tweets if it goes wrong or right at the weekend. Who knows? But yes, we're going to leave that there, guys. And we'll see you guys on the next one.